Before we start rigging our character, we're gonna focus this video on facial anatomy and facial topology. These are two important topics to be able to create a believable and realistic facial rig. For anatomy information and references, I recommend you this website, drlive.info. It has a lot of information about every aspect of anatomy. On this time, I'm gonna choose this one, that it's classic human anatomy in motion. And then I'm gonna select facial muscles. But if you can see, there's a lot of information there. So here you can see the main muscles of the face, and you don't need to memorize honestly the names, but you need to understand where they are and how they move. So for this, you can see a front view, side views. You can see the different groups of facial muscles here. And then in the bottom, you can see a little bit of deformation, how the muscles move. It has a lot of information, and if you want to take a look deeper to how muscles move for facial expressions, you can take a look to FACS. FACS is Facial Acting Coding System. FACS refers to a set of facial muscle movements to generate facial expressions. So there's different kind of movements that our face can generate, and the combination of all these generate different kind of expressions. We can see there's 28 main action units, and they are numerated. So for example, the number 1, it's inner brow raiser. Number 2, outer brow raiser. And there, as you can see, we have numbers for the cheeks, for the lids, for the nose wrinkles, for the lip corners. And they are 28. So anatomically talking, this is what our muscles can generate, and the combination of these ones can generate emotions, and there's a guide for this. This is what FACS shows. There's also for blinks and for the head, but that's a little bit different. It's kind of the same thing, but this is not for facial expressions specifically. So action units are a combination of muscles movements, and a combination of action units generate emotions. Let's take a look to some examples. Here we can see some emotions and which action units are involved in it. For example, happiness and joy is a combination of action units 6 and 12. Sadness is 1, 4, and 15. We can see for surprise, fear, anger, disgust, and any other expression. Let's take a look to the first one, that is happiness and joy. It's number 6 and number 12. If we go up, we can see the main action units. The number 6 is cheeks raisers. So if we're happy, our cheeks tend to go up, and also our mouth corners, lip corner puller. That's a combination for happiness. For example, we can take a look to any other we want. Let's take a look to sadness, and then we can continue. It's 1, 4, and 15. So number 1 is inner brow raiser. So when we are sad, our brows tend to go down. The main shape of the brow tends to go down, but the inner part of the brow tends to go up. So that's making these movements. And the number 4 is brow lower. So that's what I was talking. The main brow goes down, but the inner brow goes up. And then on number 15, it's about the lips, lip corner depressor. And this is, we have this shape on the lips are going down. So the combination of these 3 main action units make a sad expression. And all this is very important because one of the goals of a good facial rig is to be able to generate all these main action units. So our rig will need to be able to do all these, imagine one by one, to be able to generate all different kind of expressions. Because it will be very easy to just do on a rig these specific expressions, just like that, but then we will not be able to generate all the variants. So imagine having blend shapes, for example, of just these facial expressions. We are not going to have that extra appealing, that extra variance in our rig. So that's why we need to do this kind of FACS, this kind of main action units, to be able to generate different and millions of thousands of combinations possible for our facial expressions, and not just basic facial expressions. This is not an anatomy course, so I will not go deeper into that. If you have time, I invite you to take a look to all the documentation I just showed. That way, you can have a better understanding of volumes and facial expressions. Let's take a look to the main facial muscle groups so we can understand how a good topology works on a facial rig. For facial topology, we need to understand the flow of the muscles, because we will try to replicate it. For example, on the orbital muscles, we are going to try to replicate this flow, but with edges. So imagine these are loops. All these are edges that we are doing on our topology. It's the same for the other eye, of course. And this will be the end of my eyelid zone. It's the same for the mouth. So we have this edge flow, just as the muscles. And then maybe it ends somewhere here. And then we have this one. I'm gonna change the color for those ones. So now we see this edge flow. And we can see how the eyelids and the mouth connects with the zygomatic. I will use this color for these ones. So actually these ones are under the eyelid muscles. So it's something like that. Imagine this can be connected even to here because we are talking about edge flow. So these are edges. So I'm going to try to do the correct topology here. Something like this. Then we can have the forehead, something like that. We need to follow the edge flow. And then in the corners, need some loops here. Now I'm gonna do the nose loops. You see, this is the edge flow of the nose. And then this one goes back here. I will use another color for this one because this is a very important one. I will use this one. So this edge flow goes down through here and connects here. And then we can also see these muscles here. So imagine all this flow too. So something like this, it's a correct topology because it's following all the same flows than the muscles. You usually have one that divides all the face, something like that. Now, let's try to replicate all this edge flow we did here, but on a 3D model. Let's take a look first to the eyelid zone. As we can see, we have these edge flows. I will go to shading, use default material to have a better view. But you can see, this is the same edge flow we had in the previous drawing. And this is the end zone. So this is following the same flow than the muscles. And this is the same for the lips. And then we have this arc we were showing. And these muscles too. So it's actually the same. The same for the forehead. And for the nose. So we can see that we are actually respecting all the muscles flow with the topology. And the same for this one, for example. We can see the same. We have these edge flows surrounding the lips. And the same for the nose. We have these ones. For the lip corners. For the eyelids. And for the end of the eyelid zone too. This is a very good example from Miguel Miranda. In this image, he's showing us his edge flow. So he's dividing the face in groups, just as we were looking before in the muscles image like this one. So this is the flow of the muscles, and he's representing the same but with edges on a 3D model. That's what I mean with trying to replicate the flow of the muscles with a good topology and with a good edge flow in the face. Now let's take a look to the model we are going to use for this workshop. This is a model done by Mark Carmaliki. It's still in progress, so let's take a look to it and see what's good and what's wrong on it. The first thing you need to check on your model for rig is your transformations. If you select your model, you always need to be sure that your translates, rotates are in 0 and your scales are in 1. So this is working good for this model. Another thing is that we want all these attributes to be free. We don't want any animation here, so I'm going to click on my geometries, select this attribute that has some keys on them, right click, break connections. Now I will move everything into a group. I will call it face model, and I'm going to try to move this a little bit up. The first thing that is very important for a facial rig and for any other rig is to have a centered loop like this one. In this case we have it, so this is good. This is going to allow you to mirror one side to the other, so this is going to save you a lot of time. Now let's take a look to the topology. As we talked before, we have these correct groups here in the mouth that are following the flow of the muscles. We have this one that is very good to make these creases and all these angles here. For example, on the eyebrows, I think I'm gonna need more topology. For the lips, I see it's working good. Usually, we will want that if we have one loop on the upper lip, we'll want to have one on the lower lip to match it, like that. So imagine if you have 8 loops on the upper lip, you need to have 8 loops on the lower lip. This is not completely necessary, but you're going to have better shapes and the topology is going to be easier to manage if you have it like that. So I have one for this, one for this, one for this, so that's perfect actually. We have a couple everywhere, and then I like this to have one on the corners and one on the specific corner, like one on the up corner, one in the low corner, and one on the complete corner. So this is great actually in the lips are working fantastic. I'm going to take a look to the eyelids, and here's when I see a little bit of issues. For a complete blink, we're going to want a little more topology, so I'm going to add more loops on the eyelids. I'm going to go to my symmetry, I'm going to shift right click multicut, and I'm going to press Ctrl and add a new loop here. Probably 2 more actually. I'm gonna do Ctrl Z, and one here, and one here probably. Yeah, that's what I want. Now, the other thing that I see is that the eyeball is crashing with the eyelid. So we are going to fix that. Going to grab this loop, and with soft selection, I'm gonna pull it a little bit forward. So ideally, what we want is to have a perfect loop that matches our eyeball. I will hide the eyelashes, and I will see if we have that loop. So yeah, something like that. I will add an extra loop here too, to be able to maintain this volume when we make a blink, and this will work better. You need to know which one is the loop that you're going to use for the blink. To do something like that, for example, you need to have one loop that is going to match like that, and then the other ones are just going to be used as in-betweens. So you always need to be sure that you have enough topology to make a good blink here. Another thing that I see is that I want this character to have a lot of creases. So this looks like an old man or something, so I would like to have a lot more creases on the forehead. For that, I will add more topology. This is not enough to make good creases. You can actually try it. If you want to make some creases here, when your character moves the brows up, you don't have here enough topology to do that. But if I had more topology here, I would be able to do something like that, for example. Something like that, for example. But without that topology, that's impossible. So that's how we need to plan our topology for the rig. If we don't want this kind of creases here, we don't need this kind of topology. But if we want more detail, we need to add more loops there. For example, I would also want more loops here in this area to have a lot more creases in this area. When our character is going to be angry, I want to have more creases on the nose area. So I'm gonna add more loops there. But before that, I need to go back to add them on a neutral pose. This is my neutral pose. So I will add more loops here. I'm going to start with this one. And I will close my loops here. That it's an area that it's not going to be having a lot of deformation. Then I will do this. You will see why. I will try to stay with just quads. So I'm going to close this weird angle. We have two angles here. We don't want that. So I'm going to add an extra loop here. That way, we have 3 quads instead of 1 quad and 1 angle. I will do the same again to have even more topology here. I'm gonna fix this loop later. I'm gonna smooth everything and relax all these vertices so they have the same distance. So I'm not worrying about that now. And I will do the same technique to have 3 quads here instead of 1 quad and 1 angle. After that, now I'm going to relax this loop so they can have a better edge flow. To relax these quads, I'm going to use my sculpting tool. I go to surfaces and sculpt geometry tool. I'm going to use the relax. So this is just to have a better edge flow. And then you can even manually adjust each vertex. So this is a lot better. I can have a lot of detail here now. I did this because I didn't want to have all the loop around the head, because I don't want more topology here. That's unnecessary. So to have a better performance, I just cut the edges here. Now I will probably add an extra loop here on my eyebrows. Yeah, this is going to be a full loop, and one here. This will give me a lot more detail. And just to be clear, I'm adding a lot of loops here because I want to have a lot of creases in this area. I will also want to have more topology here to be able to make more creases. For example, something like this. When my character is angry, I will want something like that, even more extreme. So I need more topology there. I'm gonna add a couple extra loops there too. I will do the same technique because I don't want a complete loop like that. I don't need more topology on the lips, I don't need more topology on the nose. So that's going to decrease our performance. So I don't want to do that. I will use the same technique then. I will cut my loop on an area that doesn't have a lot of deformation. I will hide my hair. So I will probably cut my edge here. And I will use the same technique that we used before, just to have quads. And I will do the same here in the nose. I'm trying to decide which area, probably this one. We're not going to have deformation here, so I don't really care if we have a weird loop there. Oh, sorry. And there is. We just have quads, so it's totally fine. Now I have a lot more resolution here, so I can make more creases and more appealing shapes here. Now I'm gonna do the same. I'm gonna smooth this a little bit with my relax tool. Remember that you usually want to have the same sizes on the quads. And remember that you need to be sure that its edge loop, it's still symmetrical. Another thing that is good for our eyebrows is to have a loop when the brow hair is finishing. So I would actually like a loop here in this area that matches my brow hair. But I don't want to add a whole loop like that. So I will just move this one a little bit. I will use my symmetry tool, Control Shift, right click, symmetry. I will adjust a little bit. Yeah, ideally I would like that, something like that. I want a good edge flow here, so I'm moving this manually. And then I can relax this too. And then I see there's a lot of space between here comparing these two vertices, so I will move this one a little bit more. Just so they have the same distance. So something like that. I have a loop when my brow hair is finishing. I would ideally want to have another one here, but this is not like super important, so I will just leave it like that. And this is a lot better. I will move this loop here too to have more equal distances between loops. And something like that will work a lot better for our rig. Now, once that I added all these loops, if I go to my normal view, this is going to look a little bit weird, like that. So I select my model, Shift right click, and I will click Soften Edge. And I will fix that issue. Now let's do the final steps. First of all, I like to have the eyebrows on one mesh, the eyelids on another mesh, and the hair on another one. So I will click Shift right click and separate. This will make all my meshes in different ones. So I don't actually want that, so I will now combine the brows into one mesh. Combine the eyelids, I'm clicking Shift, right click, combine, and all the hair in one mesh. This is to be able to mirror blend shapes on our eyebrows and on our eyelids. We will see those techniques later. Once we do that, I'm gonna click all my meshes, Edit, Delete by Type, History. This will clean all these weird groups we have here. And I will rename my meshes. Now that we did all these changes, we have a lot of history in our character. So we need to have all this cleaned up. I will select all my meshes, Edit, Delete by Type, History. This is something very important to do before we start our rig. Now, let's start it.